She's far too ordinary to stand beside our guests. Adriana Pierce's smile never wavered as she delicately removed the dessert presentation menu from Ruby Sinclair's hands and passed it to another chef. The gesture was so graceful that anyone watching from afar might have mistaken it for simple professionalism. But inside the grand ballroom of the Vittori Foundation's annual charity gala, everyone understood exactly what had happened. A ripple of restrained laughter drifted among the city's wealthiest donors. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, while cameras continued recording as though nothing unusual had occurred. Nobody objected. Not the board members. Not the celebrity guests. Not even Leonardo Vittori, the feared Mafia boss, whose silence carried more weight than most people's commands. Ruby met his eyes for barely a second. Then she smiled. "Thank you," she said warmly. Adriana blinked. "For the promotion." Confused murmurs spread through the ballroom. Ruby gently placed her apron on the dessert table and walked toward the microphone. Within 60 seconds, the laughter had disappeared, and every person who had quietly enjoyed her humiliation wished they had remained silent. 3 weeks earlier, long before anyone would remember Ruby Sinclair's name, she had been standing inside her own bakery before sunrise, covered in flour and laughing because one of her apprentices had accidentally piped buttercream onto the ceiling. "Oh dear," Ruby sighed dramatically. "I specifically requested vanilla roses. The ceiling ordered abstract art." The kitchen erupted into laughter. Even the nervous apprentice who had nearly burst into tears couldn't help smiling. Ruby handed him another piping bag. "Good. You've already made the embarrassing mistake." He frowned. "Good? That means the rest of today gets easier." She never raised her voice, never blamed anyone. Mistakes, in Ruby's world, weren't evidence of incompetence. They were tuition. She believed confidence grew faster when people felt safe enough to fail. That philosophy explained why nearly everyone who worked with her eventually became better. Not because she demanded perfection, but because she quietly expected people to discover it themselves. At 31, Ruby Sinclair had become one of the city's most sought-after pastry chefs without chasing publicity. Luxury hotels requested her desserts. Fashion houses booked her seasonal collections months in advance. Wedding planners fought over available weekends. Ironically, many guests never knew her name. They remembered only one thing. The desserts from that event were unforgettable. Ruby preferred it that way. Fame disappeared. Good memories stayed. The invitation from the Vittori Foundation arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. The embossed envelope alone probably cost more than some bakeries spent on advertising in a month. Her assistant stared wide-eyed. "The Vittori Foundation?" Ruby nodded. "Looks expensive. You know who owns it, right?" "I know they pay invoices on time." Her assistant groaned. "Ruby, that's Leonardo Vittori." "The Leonardo Vittori." Ruby looked up from measuring chocolate. "Should I react differently?" "You should at least look intimidated." She considered the suggestion. "I'll pencil that in after lunch." Preparations for the charity gala transformed the Vittori estate into organized chaos. Florists carried towering arrangements through endless hallways. Designers argued over table linens. Musicians rehearsed beneath painted ceilings. Kitchen staff raced between ovens that never seemed to cool. Every department insisted their work was the most important. Ruby quietly ignored the competition. Instead of introducing herself to executives, she learned the names of dishwashers. Instead of correcting mistakes publicly, she whispered solutions privately. When one young cook accidentally ruined an entire tray of caramel decorations only hours before an important tasting, panic spread through the kitchen. "I've destroyed everything," he whispered. Ruby examined the shattered sugar pieces, then picked one up. She tilted her head thoughtfully. "I actually like this better." Everyone stared. "You do?" She nodded. "Nobody remembers perfect. They remember interesting." Within 20 minutes, the broken caramel had been transformed into an elegant dessert inspired by stained glass. The tasting guests praised its originality. Only the kitchen staff knew it had begun as a disaster. Ruby never mentioned it. She simply congratulated the young cook. "You saved the dessert." His eyes widened. "I thought you did. I only borrowed your mistake." Elsewhere inside the mansion, Leonardo Vittori reviewed security reports while preparations continued around him. His office overlooked the estate through floor-to-ceiling windows. He noticed almost everything: deliveries, schedules, expressions, patterns. One report caught his attention: kitchen delays, resolved; staff conflict, resolved; dessert redesign, unexpected success. He looked toward his long-time advisor. "Same person?" The older man nodded. "Ruby Sinclair." Leonardo returned to reading. Minutes later, another report arrived. "Volunteer shortage, resolved by pastry department." Again. "Ruby Sinclair." Then another. "Apprentice requesting transfer, withdrawn after speaking with Ruby." Leonardo closed the folder. "Interesting." His advisor smiled faintly. "Problems seem to become smaller wherever she works." Leonardo said nothing. He disliked drawing conclusions too early. People often behaved generously when they knew someone influential was watching. Real character appeared when nobody expected recognition. So he simply observed. By the end of the first week, something unusual had happened. The kitchen had become the calmest place in the mansion. Not because the workload had decreased. If anything, it had doubled. But wherever Ruby stood, panic somehow lost its audience. She remembered birthdays, shared recipes without protecting secrets, stayed late to help interns finish assignments that weren't technically her responsibility. She celebrated other people's victories more enthusiastically than her own. One afternoon, Leonardo happened to pass the kitchen during an inspection. He wasn't looking for conversation. He rarely entered without purpose. As he walked by, he paused almost imperceptibly. Inside, more than 20 exhausted staff members had stopped working for exactly 30 seconds. Ruby had just placed a tray of imperfect pastries onto the counter. "I have wonderful news," she announced. Everyone looked up. "We've officially run out of ugly pastries." Confused silence. She lifted one misshapen eclair. "Because this one has just been promoted to quality control." Laughter echoed through the kitchen. Even the stern sous-chef smiled. Leonardo watched for another moment before continuing down the hallway. He said nothing. But for the first time since preparations had begun, the feared boss found himself wondering not how talented Ruby Sinclair was, but why everyone around her seemed to leave each conversation standing a little straighter. Adriana Pierce arrived at the Vittori estate exactly as everyone expected she would. Elegant, perfectly dressed, perfectly punctual, perfectly aware that every eye in the room eventually found its way to her. She had built an entire career around making wealthy people feel important while quietly deciding which of them deserved her attention. When she first reviewed the list of vendors for the Vittori Foundation Gala, one name caught her eye. Ruby Sinclair, pastry chef. No television appearances, no luxury fashion endorsements, no glamorous social media image, just photographs of extravagant desserts, and a woman who smiled as though she genuinely enjoyed feeding people more than impressing them. Adriana frowned. "Strange." One assistant looked up. "What is?" "A woman who became successful without learning the importance of appearances." She closed the folder. "We'll have to correct that." Their first meeting happened during a production conference. Designers, lighting directors, security coordinators, executive chefs. Every department head occupied a seat around the long walnut table. Ruby arrived carrying 2 boxes. "Morning. I brought pastries." Several tired staff members smiled with visible relief. Before anyone reached for a croissant, Adriana gently raised one manicured finger. "I'm afraid food can wait." Her tone remained pleasant. "We're discussing presentation." She glanced toward Ruby. "Our culinary vendors usually observe rather than participate." The room became quiet. Ruby looked around. "Oh, She placed the pastry boxes on the side table. My mistake. I thought hungry people made slower decisions. A few people chuckled. Even one of the accountants failed to hide a grin. Adriana's smile remained flawless. How thoughtful. Ruby nodded sincerely. I've been called many things. Thoughtful is one of my favorites. The meeting continued. 10 minutes later, nobody remembered Adriana's correction. Everyone remembered the warm pastries. It did not take Adriana long to understand that humiliating Ruby directly would never work. Ruby simply refused to feel embarrassed. So Adriana adopted something far more elegant. She began erasing her. Menus describing Ruby's signature desserts suddenly credited another pastry consultant. Press releases omitted her name entirely. Interview requests were redirected elsewhere. At tasting events, Adriana introduced every department, except the pastry team. Each omission was subtle enough to appear accidental. Each one carefully polished, the kind of cruelty that never sounded cruel. The kitchen noticed. So did the event planners. Whispers spread quickly. Has anyone told Mr. Vittori? Surely the boss knows. He'll fix this. But Leonardo did nothing. At least, nothing anyone could see. Inside his office, one of the younger capos finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Boss, should we intervene? Leonardo continued reading financial reports. No. The room fell silent. Another capo exchanged confused glances. But she's being treated unfairly. I noticed. Then why wait? Leonardo placed the report aside. When someone is protected too early, people learn only who rescued them. He looked toward the window. When someone stands alone, everyone reveals who they are. The youngest capo still looked uncertain. Leonardo's oldest advisor quietly poured another cup of coffee. The boss isn't ignoring this. He's waiting. The advisor smiled faintly. To discover whether Miss Sinclair requires protection or merely witnesses. No one spoke again. Ruby, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the political discussion surrounding her. She simply kept baking. When another chef apologized for receiving public credit for one of her dessert displays, Ruby laughed softly. You didn't steal it. They accidentally handed you the applause. He looked miserable. I still feel guilty. She leaned closer. Then next time, clap louder when someone else succeeds. Guilt disappears much faster that way. The chef stared at her. You really aren't angry, Ruby shrugged. I'm too busy tempering chocolate. Chocolate burns if I multitask emotionally. The exhausted pastry team burst into laughter. Even the guilty chef smiled again. A week later, Adriana organized a media preview. Photographers gathered around an enormous dessert installation inspired by stained glass cathedral windows. It was Ruby's masterpiece. 3 days of nearly uninterrupted work, thousands of handcrafted sugar details. As cameras prepared to shoot, Adriana stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, she gestured gracefully toward another pastry consultant. Our creative dessert designer. The consultant froze. His face turned pale. He knew perfectly well who had created every single piece. The photographers applauded politely. Ruby quietly adjusted one decorative flower that had slipped out of place. One reporter frowned. Miss Sinclair, weren't you involved? Before anyone else could answer, Ruby smiled. Oh, absolutely. I supervised the sugar. The reporter blinked. The sugar? It refused to cooperate. I negotiated. Laughter rippled through the media group. Another journalist asked, and who won? Ruby pretended to think. We reached a delicious compromise. Soon, every photographer was asking Ruby questions anyway, not because she demanded attention, because everyone preferred interviewing the person who made them laugh. Across the room, Adriana watched the conversation slowly migrate away from her carefully prepared presentation. Her smile tightened by a fraction. That evening, Leonardo reviewed footage from the event. He rarely cared about publicity. He cared about people. The recording showed Adriana speaking flawlessly, then Ruby speaking naturally, without rehearsed lines, without performance, without resentment. She answered uncomfortable questions as though each one were an opportunity to make someone else feel comfortable. Leonardo replayed one short exchange. "Does it bother you when others receive recognition?" Ruby's recorded answer was immediate. "I bake desserts, not trophies." He paused the video. His advisor entered quietly. "You've watched that answer 3 times. Leonardo ignored the observation. Instead, he asked, "Did she know the cameras were recording?" "No." He nodded once. "Good." Authenticity interested him. Performance did not. The following afternoon, another small incident spread throughout the mansion. One of the newest kitchen assistants accidentally dropped an entire wedding cake display prepared for a private donor reception. Silence swallowed the room. The young woman burst into tears. "I've ruined everything." Before anyone could react, Ruby picked up a small piece of broken sponge cake. She tasted it thoughtfully. Everyone waited. She nodded. "Excellent." The assistant stared through tears. "What is?" "Our emergency cake." "There isn't one." "There is now." Within 45 minutes, Ruby had transformed the destroyed centerpiece into dozens of elegant plated desserts. Guests later praised the presentation as refreshingly modern. No one outside the kitchen ever learned the truth. When the assistant thanked Ruby afterward, Ruby simply hugged her. "You know what the best chefs have in common?" "What?" "They've all dropped something expensive." The assistant laughed through her tears. "So I'm improving?" Ruby grinned. "Very expensively." Later that evening, Leonardo happened to pass the kitchen once again. This time he didn't stop because of the desserts. He stopped because of the laughter. It wasn't loud, it wasn't forced. It was the kind of laughter shared by people who felt safe. He watched Ruby speaking with dishwashers, apprentices, senior chefs and cleaners exactly the same way. No performance, no hierarchy, no calculation, only respect. Leonardo walked away without saying a word. But one thought followed him down the corridor. Power could command obedience. Money could purchase loyalty. Fear could create silence. Yet somehow, a pastry chef carrying flour on her apron had accomplished something inside his mansion that neither wealth nor authority ever could. She had made everyone feel that they mattered. Something curious happened during the second week of preparations. Nobody announced it. Nobody planned it. Yet somehow, the busiest people inside the Vittoria estate kept finding reasons to pass through the pastry kitchen. The first was a driver. He awkwardly leaned against the doorway after delivering flowers. "Miss Sinclair?" Ruby looked up from tempering dark chocolate. "Yes?" He scratched the back of his neck. "I heard you made those cinnamon cookies yesterday." She smiled. "I did. My granddaughter says they're the best she's ever tasted." Ruby wrapped a small paper bag and handed it to him. "Then she should have these before someone important eats them." The driver blinked. "You don't even know her." "I know grandfathers. They're terrible at keeping treats for themselves." The kitchen erupted in laughter. The driver laughed loudest of all. The next morning, 2 security guards appeared. They claimed they were inspecting emergency exits. Curiously, they inspected the hallway beside the pastry kitchen 3 times. Ruby raised an eyebrow. "You gentlemen seem very concerned about this corridor." One guard coughed. "Security requires consistency." "I see." She slid 2 warm butter tarts onto a plate. "In that case, these require immediate inspection." The guards accepted them with the seriousness of soldiers receiving classified evidence. One whispered after taking a bite, "This may be the safest hallway in the city." Soon, everyone had an excuse. The gardeners delivered herbs that no one had requested. The accountants suddenly preferred discussing invoices in person. Even housekeeping adjusted cleaning schedules to coincide with Ruby's afternoon coffee break. The pastry kitchen slowly became the happiest room in the mansion. Not because of the desserts, because people left feeling lighter than when they had entered. Ruby remembered names, asked about sick relatives, celebrated birthdays, thanked dishwashers before executive chefs. She possessed a rare gift. She made ordinary people feel unforgettable. Leonardo noticed. He noticed because productivity reports unexpectedly improved across multiple departments. Employee complaints declined. Volunteer retention increased. Kitchen overtime decreased despite heavier workloads. His chief financial officer entered one afternoon carrying monthly reports. "I've checked these 3 times. Leonardo glanced up. "Problem? No. That's the problem." He pointed at several charts. "Staff efficiency has increased nearly 18%. Leonardo studied the numbers. "What changed?" The accountant hesitated. "I honestly think it's Miss Sinclair." Silence followed. The accountant immediately regretted his answer. He expected skepticism. Instead, Leonardo simply nodded once. "I reached the same conclusion." Later that week, Ruby prepared desserts for an intimate dinner attended by several international business partners. As the final plates left the kitchen, one visiting investor stopped beside her workstation. He tasted a spoonful of raspberry mousse and closed his eyes. "Incredible." Ruby smiled politely. "Thank you," he continued. "I've attended royal banquets, luxury cruises, Michelin-starred restaurants. I honestly can't remember enjoying dessert this much." Several nearby staff members smiled proudly. The investor extended his business card. "If you ever consider opening your own international brand, call me first." Before Ruby could answer, another voice interrupted. "So?" Everyone turned. Leonardo Vittori stood calmly behind them. His expression remained perfectly composed. The investor smiled respectfully. "Mr. Vittori," Leonardo nodded. "I trust you've enjoyed dinner." "Very much. And Miss Sinclair deserves extraordinary praise." Leonardo looked toward Ruby, then back at the investor. "I see." A brief pause. Then he asked in an almost conversational tone, "Have you finished reviewing the acquisition documents my legal department requested yesterday?" The investor blinked. "The documents?" "Not yet." Leonardo gave a courteous smile. "I recommend beginning there." The businessman excused himself almost immediately. Ruby watched him hurry away. She looked genuinely puzzled. "Was he in trouble?" Leonardo answered evenly. "He is now very busy." Without another word, he walked away. Ruby turned toward the sous-chef. "I hope I didn't interrupt his paperwork." The sous-chef bit his lip so hard it nearly hurt. News traveled quickly through the mansion. Within an hour, every capo had heard the story. One of them laughed into his espresso. "He did it again." Another shook his head. "Second time this week." The boss redirected another compliment. Leonardo's oldest advisor quietly folded his newspaper. "You're all missing the obvious." The younger men leaned forward. "The boss has officially declared war." "Against whom?" The advisor smiled. "Against every man who notices Miss Sinclair." The room exploded with laughter. At that exact moment, Leonardo entered. Silence. Absolute silence. He looked around slowly. "What amused everyone?" One capo answered far too quickly. "Accounting." Leonardo stared for several seconds. "I wasn't aware accounting had become entertaining." "It recently improved." Leonardo nodded thoughtfully. "I'll congratulate the finance department." He continued walking. Only after the door closed did the room erupt again. Ruby remained blissfully unaware. She assumed Leonardo simply cared deeply about efficiency. When one of the pastry assistants teased her, "I think the boss likes you," Ruby nearly dropped a tray of eclairs. "The boss likes punctual invoices. He barely speaks." "Exactly. So if he speaks to you twice in one day, that's practically poetry." Ruby laughed so hard powdered sugar covered her apron. "You've all been working too many hours." The following weekend, the estate hosted a small birthday celebration for one of the senior bodyguards. The man expected little more than coffee and sandwiches. Instead, Ruby secretly organized a cake decorated with tiny edible versions of security radios, sunglasses, and suit jackets. When the bodyguard saw it, he froze. "You remembered?" Ruby looked confused. "You've protected everyone here for 15 years. I assumed someone should remember your birthday. The large man cleared his throat awkwardly. Thank you. Word spread through security within minutes. By evening, half the guards were arguing over which dessert Ruby should make for future family celebrations. Leonardo observed the scene from an upstairs balcony. His advisor joined him. You've built a loyal organization, Leonardo answered quietly. They're loyal because they're respected. The advisor smiled. And who reminded them what respect feels like? Leonardo did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched Ruby cutting oversized slices because she insisted birthday calories didn't count. Staff members surrounded her, laughing, talking, relaxed. No one behaved that way around him. They admired him. They trusted him. Many feared him. But Ruby, she was loved. There was a difference, a significant one he had never fully appreciated until now. Later that evening, Leonardo entered the kitchen after everyone had left. Only Ruby remained, carefully boxing leftover pastries for a nearby children's shelter. You should have gone home hours ago, he said. She looked up and smiled. So should you. I own the building, and I own the leftovers. He almost smiled. Almost. She sealed another box. Waste bothers me. So does hunger. Leonardo watched her work. You never keep the extras? She shook her head. I already know what they taste like. I'd rather someone else discover them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. As Ruby lifted the final box, Leonardo reached for it before she could. I'll have someone deliver these. She blinked. You don't have to. I know. Another brief silence. Then, in the calmest voice imaginable, he added, I'd simply like to. Ruby thanked him with the same warm smile she offered everyone else, yet for reasons he could not explain. That simple smile felt strangely different when directed at him. And for the first time in years, Leonardo Vittori left a meeting not thinking about business, but wondering when he might see the pastry chef again.
The night of the Vittori Foundation Charity Gala finally arrived. Months of preparation disappeared beneath crystal chandeliers, fresh orchids, candlelight, and the effortless elegance that only enormous effort could produce. Luxury cars rolled through the front gates one after another. Philanthropists, judges, artists, diplomats, business leaders. Every table represented influence. Every conversation represented opportunity. The ballroom glittered with wealth. Yet behind the polished doors, the kitchen looked exactly as it always did. Steam, timers, flour, people moving with practiced urgency. Ruby tied her apron one final time and clapped her hands. Everyone. The room quieted. She looked around at every familiar face. The young apprentice who had once cried over broken caramel. The dishwasher who never missed a shift. The sous chef who secretly sang while whisking cream. The cleaners already preparing for tomorrow before tonight had even begun. Ruby smiled. Tonight. Someone will probably compliment the flowers. The florists laughed. They'll admire the music. The musicians nodded. They'll remember the speeches. The event coordinators exchanged amused glances. She paused. But whether anyone notices us or not, hundreds of people will leave tonight, carrying good memories. She gently placed a hand over her heart. And we get to be part of that. No dramatic speech, no applause, just dozens of people quietly returning to work, standing a little taller than before. The evening unfolded almost perfectly. Guests admired every course. Auction bids exceeded expectations. Journalists praised the atmosphere. Even Adriana Pierce appeared satisfied. She moved through the ballroom like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Every introduction polished. Every photograph carefully staged. Then came the closing ceremony, the annual tradition. Every department head would be invited onto the stage to receive recognition before the foundation announced next year's initiatives. Staff members gathered quietly near the ballroom entrance. Some adjusted jackets. Others nervously smoothed wrinkles from their uniforms. Ruby remained near the back. She had no expectation of standing under the lights. Recognition had never been her destination. Adriana stepped to the microphone. Her voice floated effortlessly through the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, what an extraordinary evening. Polite applause followed. She began introducing department leaders one by one. Security, operations, finance, hospitality, floral design, entertainment. Each received warm applause. Finally, she reached the culinary division. Our remarkable executive culinary team deserves tremendous appreciation. Several chefs walked toward the stage. Ruby waited where she was. Then Adriana smiled gracefully. And, naturally, our support staff will remain behind the scenes, where their invaluable assistance has always belonged. The sentence sounded respectful, almost complimentary. Almost. The audience applauded politely. Many never realized what had just happened, but everyone working inside the kitchen understood. Ruby had been deliberately excluded. Again. Several staff members looked toward Leonardo. He remained seated, expression unreadable, completely silent. One of the younger capos quietly muttered, "Boss." Leonardo did not move. Ruby inhaled slowly. Then, she smiled. Not the smile of someone pretending not to hurt. The smile of someone who had already decided what mattered. She walked calmly toward Adriana. "May I ask one favor?" Adriana tilted her head elegantly. "Of course. May I thank the guests before I leave?" Adriana hesitated for only half a second. A farewell speech could hardly cause damage. In fact, it would make her appear generous. She stepped aside. "The stage is yours." Ruby thanked her sincerely, then approached the microphone. The ballroom settled into comfortable expectation. Most assumed she would deliver a brief goodbye. Instead, Ruby looked toward the staff standing around the walls of the ballroom. Then she smiled. "I promise to keep this short." Soft laughter. She continued. "Tonight, many wonderful people have already been thanked." She nodded toward the stage. "They deserve it." A pause. "But before I leave, I'd like to thank a few people whose names are almost never announced." The room grew quieter. Ruby looked toward the entrance. "Michael." The elderly doorman blinked. "You remembered my name?" She smiled. "You've opened this door for nearly 600 guests tonight. They entered smiling because you greeted every one of them." Several heads turned toward the surprised doorman. Applause began. Small at first, then stronger. Ruby continued. "Elena, the florist who replaced 12 damaged centerpieces before sunrise." Elena covered her mouth. Another wave of applause. "Marcus, the dishwasher. You've washed nearly 4,000 pieces of silver this week. If one glass sparkled tonight, it's because of you." Marcus looked as though he wished the floor would swallow him. Instead, the ballroom applauded again. Louder. Ruby continued walking through the invisible architecture of the evening. She thanked the cleaners who arrived before dawn, the drivers who waited outside in the rain, the lighting technician who repaired a failed circuit 30 minutes before guests arrived, the apprentice who remade 200 macarons after discovering one tray wasn't perfect. Every name came with a story. Every story revealed unseen effort. Something remarkable began happening. Guests who had barely noticed the staff all evening now searched the room for them. Waiters received applause. Kitchen assistants straightened their backs. Several donors stood to clap. Not because Ruby asked them to, because gratitude is strangely contagious when it is genuine. Adriana's smile slowly disappeared. She suddenly understood what was happening. Ruby had not defended herself. She had simply changed the definition of importance. Without criticizing anyone, she had exposed everyone who measured worth by visibility alone. The applause filling the ballroom no longer belonged to celebrities. It belonged to ordinary people, and there was no graceful way to interrupt kindness. When Ruby finally reached the end of her speech, she lowered the microphone. "Thank you. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." Nothing more. She stepped away. Silence settled over the ballroom. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Then, a single chair moved. Leonardo Vittori stood. Every conversation stopped instantly. He walked toward the stage with the calm confidence of a man who never hurried, because nothing in his world required chasing. When he reached the microphone, he looked neither at Adriana nor at the board members. He looked directly at the audience. I own this foundation. His voice remained steady, measured. But tonight, he turned toward Ruby. She reminded all of us what it was actually built for. The ballroom remained perfectly still. Leonardo continued. Many of you expected me to intervene earlier. A few guests exchanged surprised glances. I remained silent, because influence is loud, but character is only visible when influence remains quiet. He looked at Ruby with unmistakable admiration. I wanted everyone here to discover her character before discovering my opinion. A warm murmur spread through the room. Leonardo smiled, a genuine smile, one that very few people had ever witnessed. I underestimated only one thing. Ruby folded her arms playfully. Oh? And what was that? His answer came without hesitation. How quickly I'd fall in love with the woman who thanked everyone except herself. For one heartbeat, absolute silence. Then the ballroom erupted. Laughter. Applause. Even donors who had maintained dignified composure all evening found themselves smiling. Ruby laughed, cheeks turning pink. So, she looked at him mischievously. Does this speech come with a raise? The room laughed even harder. Leonardo didn't miss a beat. I was thinking dinner. Ruby pretended to consider. That depends. On what? She pointed toward the dessert tables. You'll have to pass quality inspection first. For the first time that evening, the feared Mafia boss actually laughed. Not politely, not quietly. Honestly, the applause that followed was no longer for a successful gala. It was for two people who had reminded an entire ballroom that dignity is never won by standing above others, but by making sure no one beneath you is forgotten.
The story of what happened at the Vittori Foundation Gala spread through the city far faster than anyone had expected. Curiously, very few people talked about Leonardo Vittori's confession. Instead, newspapers praised the speech that had transformed an elegant charity event into something genuinely meaningful. Social media clips showed waiters receiving standing ovations. Photos of smiling cleaners flooded charity pages. A short video of the elderly doorman wiping tears from his eyes after hearing Ruby remember his name was shared thousands of times. One headline summarized the evening perfectly. The woman who made the invisible impossible to ignore. Ruby read none of it. She was far too busy helping two apprentices rescue a batch of burnt profiteroles. 3 days later, every department head gathered once again inside the Foundation's conference room. This meeting, however, was much shorter. Leonardo stood at the head of the table. As of today, all culinary operations for every charitable event organized by the Vittori Foundation will be directed by one person. He looked toward Ruby. Miss Ruby Sinclair. The room erupted into applause. No one appeared surprised. In truth, most of them wondered why it had taken so long. Ruby blinked. I'm honored. She hesitated. But I'd like one condition. Several board members exchanged puzzled glances. Leonardo folded his hands. Go on. She smiled. Everyone in the kitchen receives professional development funding. The apprentices, the dishwashers, the assistants. If I move forward, they come with me. Silence. Then the oldest board member quietly laughed. I believe she's negotiating on behalf of everyone except herself. Leonardo answered immediately. Approved. No debate, no committee vote, no hesitation. Ruby sighed dramatically. You make negotiations far too easy. Leonardo's expression remained perfectly serious. I've learned it's unwise to argue with pastry chefs. The room burst into laughter. As for Adriana Pierce, no dramatic dismissal ever came. No public humiliation. No revenge. Instead, the board simply stopped requesting her services. Not because Leonardo ordered it. He never did. The trustees had watched the gala themselves. They had reached their own conclusions. Grace had exposed arrogance far more effectively than accusation ever could. Months later, Adriana would privately admit to a colleague, I spent years mastering elegant speeches, and she defeated me by saying thank you. Life inside the Vittori estate slowly settled into a comfortable rhythm. Except, one curious habit began attracting attention. Leonardo Vittori suddenly developed an extraordinary interest in kitchen inspections. He appeared every Tuesday, sometimes Thursday, occasionally Friday as well, always for perfectly reasonable business purposes. Naturally. The capos remained unconvinced. One afternoon, a younger capo whispered, "Boss, you inspected the pastry kitchen yesterday?" Leonardo continued reading paperwork. "Correct. And today?" "Correct. And tomorrow's schedule also says kitchen." Leonardo looked up calmly. Quality requires consistency. The oldest advisor hid another smile behind his coffee cup. "Remarkable." "What is?" "I've worked for you for 32 years. I've never seen you inspect desserts this aggressively." Ruby pretended not to notice. At least, for the first few weeks. Then one quiet afternoon, she walked into the kitchen pantry unexpectedly. Leonardo stood completely alone. A small chocolate eclair rested in one hand. He had already taken one bite. He slowly looked toward her. Neither spoke. Ruby folded her arms. "So, the boss steals desserts now?" Without the slightest hint of embarrassment, Leonardo finished chewing. "I'm conducting a security inspection." She nodded thoughtfully. "I see." "And the chocolate filling?" He examined the pastry with complete seriousness. Potential evidence. Ruby couldn't help herself. She laughed, not the polite laugh she offered guests, the genuine one, the kind that filled the room. Nearby staff immediately looked toward the pantry. One whispered, "He got caught." Another grinned. "I've been waiting weeks for this." Leonardo calmly reached for a second eclair. Ruby raised an eyebrow. "More evidence?" He nodded. "I'll need a larger sample size." The entire kitchen exploded with laughter. Spring arrived. Then summer. The foundation expanded its charitable programs. Every event somehow felt warmer than before. Not because the decorations improved, not because the menus became more expensive, because the culture had changed. Executives thanked interns by name. Managers celebrated cleaners during staff meetings. Volunteers returned year after year. Ruby had never intended to transform an organization. She had simply treated every person as though their work mattered. The remarkable part was discovering how contagious respect could become. One quiet afternoon, after another successful charity luncheon, Ruby and Leonardo walked together through the estate gardens carrying 2 cups of coffee. Neither seemed interested in filling every silence. They had learned something much rarer. Comfort. As they disappeared down the stone pathway, one young pastry assistant watched them leave. "I used to think powerful men earned respect by making everyone fear them." An elderly chef beside him smiled gently. "No. The strongest ones certainly can." He watched Leonardo open the garden gate for Ruby before following her through. "But the wisest ones choose to stand beside the person who makes everyone else feel valued." The old chef returned to work. The assistant remained quietly thoughtful. Inside the kitchen, fresh bread filled the air with warmth. Outside, laughter drifted through the gardens. And somewhere between flower-covered aprons and perfectly tailored suits, a feared Mafia boss had discovered that the greatest kind of strength was never found in commanding a room. It was found in quietly admiring the woman who had taught an entire ballroom how to see one another. A clinking cocktail glass can mask the sound of a loaded gun. In the city's most exclusive restaurant, a betrayal was perfectly orchestrated to end an empire. But the assassins made one fatal mistake. They completely ignored the heavy-set waitress refilling their water. She saw absolutely everything. Clara Jenkins knew the true superpower of being a fat woman in a high-end establishment. Absolute, unquestioned invisibility. At L'Etoile, a Michelin-starred fortress of French cuisine, tucked into Chicago's affluent Gold Coast, the patrons preferred their service staff to be sleek, silent, and entirely unmemorable. Clara was certainly silent, but at 280 pounds, she took up space. Yet in the eyes of the billionaires, politicians, and underworld kings who dined there, Her size rendered her a non-entity. They looked right through her, assuming someone of her build couldn't possibly possess the sharpest eyes in the room. They spoke of millions of dollars in laundered funds, political blackmail, and illicit affairs, while she quietly scraped truffle remnants from their Limoges porcelain plates. On a damp Tuesday evening in late October, the atmosphere inside L'Étoile was unusually thick. Clara adjusted her black apron, smoothing it over her wide hips, and picked up a fresh silver water pitcher. The reservation list for Table 7 had been booked under a shell corporation, but every staff member knew who was coming. Damien Rossi. Damien wasn't just a businessman, he was the undisputed architect of the Rossi crime syndicate. Operating under the guise of Rossi Logistics and Freight, his reach extended from the ports of Chicago all the way down to Miami. He was a man of quiet, terrifying authority. He didn't yell, he didn't posture, he simply commanded the room by breathing in it. At precisely 8 o'clock, the heavy mahogany doors parted. Damien walked in, shedding a tailored cashmere overcoat into the hands of a trembling hostess. Beside him was Chloe Vanderwall. Chloe was a striking socialite, the heiress to a minor pharmaceutical fortune that had seen better days. She was all sharp angles, platinum hair, and predatory grace, wearing a silk emerald gown that clung to her frame like a second skin. To the untrained eye, she was the perfect mob accessory, beautiful, poised, and utterly devoted. But Clara's eyes were far from untrained. As Clara approached Table 7 to pour the initial round of sparkling water, she noticed the micro-expressions. Chloe's smile was flawless, but her eyes were frantic, darting toward the restaurant's brass-trimmed entrance, and then toward the dimly lit bar area in the back. Her manicured fingers resting on the white linen tablecloth tapped an erratic, anxious rhythm. "The sea bass for the lady," Damien told the waiter smoothly, his deep voice carrying a gravelly undertone. "And the bone-in ribeye for me. Rare." Clara stepped in, lifting her pitcher. "Still or sparkling, Mr. Rossi?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully modulated. "Sparkling. Thank you," he replied, not glancing up from his phone. As Clara poured, Chloe shifted in her seat. The socialite's designer clutch sat slightly open on the table, and Clara, standing at a vantage point above them, caught a glimpse of the glowing screen inside. It was a text thread. The last message received was a single word, "ready." Clara's heart did a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She backed away respectfully, bowing her head and retreating toward the service station. From the shadows of the alcove, she began scanning the restaurant. L'Étoile was meticulously managed. Clara knew every regular, every face, every pattern. Tonight, the pattern was broken. Booth 4. Two men nursing neat whiskies. They wore off-the-rack suits that bunched at the shoulders, concealing something bulky beneath their armpits. They weren't touching their drinks. Their eyes were locked on the reflection of Damien's table in the mirrored wall. The Bar A man in a charcoal trench coat had been sitting there for 20 minutes. He hadn't ordered food. His left hand was buried deep in his pocket. The kitchen exit, the busboy, a young kid named Tomas, who usually lingered near the swinging doors, had quietly vanished. Clara wiped down a tray, her mind racing. She recognized the man at the bar from a late-night news segment she had watched weeks ago. Jonathan Jackal. Hayes, a freelance contractor, heavily associated with the Irish factions on the south side. The Rossi Syndicate had recently pushed the Irish out of the Fulton Market district. This wasn't just a dinner. This was a synchronized hit. And Chloe Vanderwall had served Damien up on a silver platter. Clara watched as Chloe suddenly stood up, smoothing her emerald dress. "I'm just going to step into the ladies' room, darling," she cooed, leaning down to brush her lips against Damien's cheek. "Take your time," Damien murmured, swirling his scotch. As Chloe walked away, she briefly caught the eye of the man in the charcoal trench coat at the bar. She gave a microscopic, almost imperceptible nod. The man shifted, uncrossing his legs. Clara's breath hitched. The pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Chloe was stepping out of the line of fire. The moment she was safely inside the reinforced marble walls of the restroom, The men in booth 4 and the man at the bar were going to converge on table 7. Damian Rossi was going to be gunned down right over his bone-in ribeye, and Clara, along with the rest of the staff, would be caught in the crossfire. She looked at Damian. He was sitting alone, looking at his phone, completely oblivious to the fact that his empire was about to end in a spray of bullets and shattered glass. He had always been polite to Clara. He never snapped his fingers at her, never treated her like an idiot because of her weight. Last Christmas, he had left a $5,000 tip for the back-of-house staff. Clara made a decision. She wasn't going to let this man die on her shift. The kitchen was a cacophony of shouting chefs, clattering pans and hissing steam. But to Clara, the noise faded into a dull roar. Her hands were shaking. She moved to the service terminal, tearing a small blank sheet of receipt paper from the machine. She dug a cheap blue ballpoint pen out of her apron pocket. She needed to be fast. She needed to be concise. There was no time for explanations, and if she warned him verbally, the assassins would see the panic rushing their timeline. Pressing the paper against the stainless steel counter, Clara wrote in sharp block letters, "Your girlfriend sold you out. They are in position. Bar and booth 4. She folded the tiny square of paper twice until it was no bigger than a postage stamp. She palmed it, her sweaty skin clinging to the thermal paper. "Order up for table 7, Chef Laurent barked, slamming a silver cloche over a plate. "Clara, run the sides. Now." Clara grabbed the tray of creamed spinach and truffle potatoes. Her heavy footsteps felt like lead weights on the tiled floor as she pushed through the swinging doors and re-entered the dining room. The atmosphere had shifted. The air was practically vibrating with lethal intent. The 2 men in booth 4 were leaning forward, their hands slipping into their jackets. The man at the bar had stood up, tossing a crumpled $100 bill onto the counter. Chloe was nowhere to be seen. She was securely hidden in the restroom. Clara approached table 7. Her large frame completely blocked the line of sight between the bar and Damian for a split second. She set the heavy ceramic bowls of side dishes down with practiced grace. "Your sides, Mr. Rossi," Clara said quietly. "Thank you," Damian said, picking up his fork. As Clara reached forward to adjust his Scotch glass, she extended her index finger, pressing the folded receipt paper directly against the base of the glass, sliding it smoothly under the crystal rim. Damian's eyes flicked from the glass to her face. Clara didn't break eye contact. Her round, flushed face was devoid of the usual subservient hospitality smile. Her eyes were wide, urgent, and dead serious. She gave a singular heavy nod, then immediately turned her broad back and walked away, her hips swaying with a forced, casual rhythm. From the safety of the Waitress station, Clara watched her pulse pounding in her ears. Damian Rossi was a predator who had survived 36 years in a world where men rarely lived past 30. He didn't gasp. He didn't look over his shoulder. He seamlessly moved his hand to his glass, taking a sip of scotch, and as he set the glass down, his thumb swept the folded paper into his palm. He unrolled it under the table, shielded by the heavy linen cloth. Clara counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. She saw the exact moment the words registered in his brain. The muscles in Damian's jaw feathered a microscopic tightening of his facial features. His posture changed entirely. Moments ago, he was a relaxed man, enjoying an evening with his lover. Now, every muscle in his back was coiled like a spring. Instead of drawing a weapon, Damian reached into his breast pocket and casually pulled out his phone. He typed something out with his thumb, his face a mask of supreme indifference. Across the room, the man in the trench coat took his first step toward table 7. Suddenly, Chloe emerged from the hallway leading to the restrooms. She walked with forced elegance, a fake smile plastered across her face. She returned to her seat, smoothing her dress. "Sorry, darling," Chloe murmured, reaching for her wine glass. "The clasp on my shoe was coming loose." Damian looked at her. It was a look of pure, terrifying void. "Is that right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said, taking a sip. Her hand was trembling so badly the wine sloshed against the glass. "Why are you looking at me like that, Damien? I'm just admiring you." Damien lied his voice, like velvet over broken glass. "You know, Chloe, it's funny. I was just thinking about your brother Richard. How is his debt problem holding up?" Chloe blanched, all the color drained from her perfectly contoured face. "Richard, he's fine. Why do you ask?" "Because," Damien said, leaning forward, steepling his fingers, "I heard he took a sizable loan from the Southside Irish. A loan he couldn't pay. Unless, of course, he offered them something of equal value to cancel the debt." Chloe's breath hitched. She glanced frantically toward the bar, making accidental fatal eye contact with Jonathan Hayes. That was all the confirmation Damien needed. The waitress was right. Damien didn't hesitate. With lightning speed, his left hand shot out across the table, grabbing Chloe by the throat of her emerald dress. He yanked her forward violently, using her body as a human shield, just as the man in the trench coat pulled a suppressed Glock from his pocket and raised it. "Get down!" Clara screamed at the top of her lungs, her booming voice shattering the quiet elegance of the restaurant. Chaos erupted. Patrons shrieked, diving under tables, as the first suppressed shot futted through the air, shattering the bottle of sparkling water, right where Damien's chest had been a millisecond prior. Damien hurled Chloe backward into the oncoming path of the two men, rushing from booth 4, causing them to stumble over her flailing limbs. In the same fluid motion, Damien drew a compact Sig Sauer from his ankle holster. He didn't fire blindly. He fired with surgical precision. Crack, crack. The two men from booth 4 dropped their knees, giving out as Damien's rounds found their marks in their kneecaps and shoulders. The restaurant was a deafening chorus of screams, shattering plates and rushing bodies. Clara had thrown her massive frame behind the solid oak wood of the hostess stand, pulling the young, terrified hostess down with her. She peeked around the corner. Damien was advancing on the trenchcoat assassin, dodging a wild shot that tore through a Renaissance painting on the wall. Damien moved like a ghost, closing the distance and delivering a brutal strike to the man's wrist, sending the Glock skittering across the polished hardwood floor. With a swift kick to the back of the assassin's knees, Damien had him pinned to the ground. The entire violent ballet had taken less than 15 seconds. The restaurant fell into a horrified, breathless silence, broken only by the whimpering of Chloe Vanderwall, who was huddled on the floor, her beautiful emerald dress covered in spilled wine and broken glass. Damien stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving slightly. He looked down at Chloe, his eyes entirely devoid of mercy. "You should have let Richard die," Damien said coldly. He then turned his head, scanning the terrified crowd hiding under the tables. His dark eyes swept over the room until they locked onto the large, breathless woman, peeking out from behind the oak stand. Damien's gaze met Clara's. He slowly raised his hand, tapping 2 fingers against his temple in a silent salute of profound gratitude. He owed her his life, and a man like Damien Rossi never left a debt unpaid. But as the distant wail of Chicago police sirens began to echo through the rain-slicked streets, Clara knew that slipping that note hadn't just saved a Mafia boss. It had irrevocably dragged her directly into his dark, dangerous world. The aftermath of the L'Etoile shootout was a masterclass in underworld efficiency. Before the first police cruiser even squealed to a halt outside the restaurant, Damien Rossi's fixers had already infiltrated the scene. They were men in sharp suits who moved with terrifying purpose, wiping down surfaces, gathering the discarded weapons, and quietly escorting a sobbing Chloe Vanderwall out through the service alley. When the Chicago Police Department finally breached the dining room, they found 2 bleeding hitmen, a shattered restaurant, and a highly rehearsed narrative. Damien's high-powered attorneys had already arrived, presenting a watertight case of self-defense against known cartel associates. Through it all, Clara played her part perfectly. When Detective Harrison, a weary, overworked man with a cheap trench coat, shined a flashlight in her face and asked what she saw, she gave him the exact performance the world expected of her. "I don't know," Clara stammered, wrapping her arms around her broad frame, letting her voice tremble. I was serving the creamed spinach. I heard pops. I dropped the tray and hid behind the wood stand. I swear that's all I saw. I just closed my eyes and prayed. The detective barely wrote it down. To him, she was just another hysterical, traumatized civilian. An invisible overweight waitress who couldn't possibly be of any tactical use. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. For 3 days, Clara's life returned to a paralyzing semblance of normal. The restaurant was closed for renovations, so she stayed locked in her cramped second-story apartment in Logan Square, jumping at every creaking floorboard. She kept expecting men with suppressed pistols to kick down her door. She had interfered in a mob hit. People like her didn't survive things like that. On the 4th night, the rain was coming down in sheets. Clara was walking back from a late-night run to the corner bodega, clutching a plastic bag of groceries against her heavy coat. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the wet pavement. A black Cadillac Escalade, its windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian, glided to a stop right beside her. Clara froze. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked around, calculating the distance to her apartment building. It was too far. She couldn't run. The rear passenger door swung open. A man stepped out, holding a large black umbrella. He wasn't a thug. He wore a bespoke navy suit and carried himself with lethal discipline. "Clara Jenkins," the man said. His voice was smooth, devoid of threat, but thick with authority. "My name is Leon. Mr. Rossi would like a word with you." Clara clutched her groceries tighter. "I don't have anything to say to the police, or anyone else." "Mr. Rossi isn't the police." "Clara," Leon replied, stepping aside to reveal the plush leather interior of the SUV. "And he doesn't want to hurt you. He wants to thank you. Please, it would be entirely in your best interest to get in." Swallowing her fear, Clara climbed into the back seat. The door clicked shut, plunging her into a world of climate-controlled luxury and faint cologne. They drove for an hour, leaving the grimy streets of the city behind for the sprawling forested estates of Lake Forest. The Escalade passed through massive wrought-iron gates, pulling up to a stunning stone mansion overlooking Lake Michigan. Leon escorted her inside, leading her down a long hallway, lined with museum-quality art, until he opened a set of heavy oak double doors. "Miss Jenkins, sir," Leon announced, stepping back and closing the door behind her. The study was cavernous, smelling of old paper leather and expensive bourbon. A fire roared in the hearth. Standing by the massive bay window, looking out at the stormy lake, was Damian Rossi. He wore a simple black turtleneck and dark slacks, looking less like a ruthless crime boss and more like a weary king. He turned, his dark eyes locked onto her, and for the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel invisible. She felt entirely exposed. "Clara," Damian said, walking over to a crystal decanter. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Do you drink?" "Only when my life is in imminent danger," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. The corner of Damian's mouth twitched upward into a rare, genuine smile. He handed her a glass. "You aren't in danger here, I promise you that." "Drink." She took a sip. It burned like liquid fire going down, but warmed her freezing chest. "I did a background check on you," Damian said, leaning against the edge of his mahogany desk. "Clara Jenkins, 32 years old, no criminal record, a degree in psychology you never used. You've worked in high-end hospitality for 10 years. You have a quiet life. A very quiet life." "I like quiet," Clara said defensively. "Quiet saved my life," Damian corrected her, his tone dropping an octave, becoming intensely serious. "That note. You noticed Jackal at the bar. You noticed the 2 hitters in booth 4. But more importantly, you noticed Chloe." Clara looked down at her glass. She was tapping her fingers. Her micro-expressions were off. She was scared, but not of you. She was anticipating something. Damian nodded slowly, studying her with an analytical, predatory gaze. "My own security detail didn't see it. The men I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to protect me were completely blind to what a waitress saw while pouring sparkling water. People underestimate what service staff see, Clara said, lifting her chin. And they underestimate me. Because of how I look. I'm big. I don't fit their aesthetic of a threat. So they talk in front of me. They plan in front of me. They become careless. Damien stepped closer. He didn't look at her with pity, nor did he look at her with the polite disdain she was used to from wealthy men. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated awe. "You weaponized your own invisibility," Damien murmured. "That is the smartest damn thing I have ever heard." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The sheer proximity of the man was intoxicating. He exuded raw power, yet there was a gentleness in how he addressed her. "Why did you do it, Clara?" he asked softly. "You could have just run. You could have let me die." "Because you said thank you," Clara blurted out before she could stop herself. Damien blinked, genuinely confused. "Excuse me. When I poured your water, you said thank you. You didn't wave me off. Last year, you tipped the dishwasher who burned his hand so he could pay his rent. You're a criminal, Mr. Rossi. But you aren't a monster. I wasn't going to let Chloe Vanderwall get you killed over her idiot brother." A heavy electric silence filled the room. Damien stared at her, the mask of the Mafia boss completely falling away, revealing the solitary, fiercely loyal man underneath. "You're done waiting tables, Clara," Damien finally said, walking back around his desk. He pulled out a checkbook, wrote down a number, and slid it across the polished wood. Clara looked at the check. It was for $250,000. "That is your signing bonus," Damien said. "I am offering you a job, $500,000 a year. I don't want you to carry a gun. I don't want you to launder money. I want you to attend my meetings. I want you at my galas, my dinners, and my negotiations. I want you to sit quietly in the corner, and I want you to watch." He leaned forward, his eyes burning into hers. "Be my eyes, Clara. Tell me who is lying. Tell me who is plotting. Tell me who is going to betray me next." Clara looked at the check, then up at the ruthless king of the Chicago underworld. She took a deep breath, picked up the pen on his desk, and signed the contract he slid next to the check. "When do we start?" she asked. Over the next 6 months, the power dynamics of the Rossi syndicate shifted in a way no one could have predicted. Clara became Damien's shadow. Officially, she was listed on the payroll of Rossi Logistics and Freight as a senior logistics consultant. Unofficially, she was his absolute ultimate weapon. At first, the capos and lieutenants scoffed. They saw a heavy-set, plain-faced woman following their boss into sit-downs and laughed behind her back. But the laughter died quickly. In November, during a tense negotiation with a corrupt city alderman named Wallace, Clara sat quietly in the corner, sipping tea. After the meeting, she told Damien that Wallace was sweating profusely, despite the AC, and his pupils were dilated signs of cocaine withdrawal or intense, immediate fear. She advised Damien to hold off on the bribe. 2 days later, Wallace was indicted by the FBI. He had been wearing a wire during their meeting. In January, she noticed Arthur Damien's longtime accountant subtly mirroring the body language of a rival boss during a neutral charity event. She investigated his ledgers with her meticulous eye for detail and found millions siphoned into offshore accounts. With every catch, Clara's confidence bloomed, and with her confidence came a stunning transformation. She didn't lose weight, she stopped apologizing for it. She carried her size with regal authority. Damien funded a brand new wardrobe hiring tailors to craft custom suits and dresses that accentuated her curves, framing her as a force of nature rather than a wallflower. But the most profound shift was between Clara and Damien. The professional barrier slowly eroded during long, late-night strategy sessions in the penthouse. They ordered takeout, drank expensive wine, and talked until dawn. Damien found himself fascinated by her brilliant mind, her wicked sense of humor, and her unwavering loyalty. For the first time in his violent life, Damien felt completely safe with someone. One evening, as they were going over shipping manifests, Clara reached for a file, her hand brushing against his. Damien caught her hand, his strong fingers wrapping around hers. Clara froze, looking up at him. Damien. He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. He looked at her with a heat that made her knees weak. You spend all your time analyzing everyone else, Clara, he whispered, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. Have you ever analyzed how I look at you? I assumed you valued my counsel. She stuttered, her heart hammering. I value your life, Damien corrected, his thumb tracing her jawline. I value your brilliant mind, and I am entirely captivated by your beauty. Damien, I'm not, she started, instinctively wanting to put herself down. Don't, he commanded, his voice rough but tender. Do not insult the woman I love. The words hit her like a physical blow. Before she could process them, Damien leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, polite kiss. It was possessive, deep, and bruising a promise of absolute devotion. Clara melted into him, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders, finally allowing herself to step out of the shadows and be entirely seen. Their relationship remained a fiercely guarded secret until the annual Continental Charity Gala in April. It was the most important event of the year, bringing together the city's legitimate elite and its shadowed underworld. The gala was being held at a newly renovated venue, L'Etoile. The restaurant had been transformed, the very place where Clara had once scraped plates and wiped tables. The room was packed with billionaires, politicians, and mobsters. When the double mahogany doors opened, a hush fell over the room. Damien Rossi walked in, but he wasn't alone, and he wasn't with a plastic socialite. On his arm was Clara. She was a vision of absolute commanding power. She wore a custom-made, off-the-shoulder sapphire blue gown that draped flawlessly over her lush curves. Diamonds dripped from her neck, catching the light of the chandeliers. Her makeup was sharp, her hair styled into sleek vintage waves. She looked terrifyingly beautiful. Whispers erupted across the room like wildfire. The elite guests recognized her. The hostesses, the bartenders, the men in expensive suits, they all realized that the fat, invisible waitress they had ignored for years was now holding the arm of the most dangerous man in Chicago. A rival boss stepped forward, his eyes wide, offering a hesitant nod. Mr. Rossi, and this must be your new partner. Damien didn't just nod. He pulled Clara closer, kissing the side of her head in front of everyone, a public declaration of her untouchable status. This is Clara, Damien said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. She is the only reason I am breathing. And if any of you ever look through her again, I will personally ensure it is the last thing you see. Clara looked out at the sea of terrified, respectful faces. She wasn't just seen anymore. She was feared. She was revered. The invisible waitress was gone forever, and in her place stood the undeniable queen of the Rossi Empire. If you were captivated by Clara's rise from an invisible waitress to an unstoppable Mafia queen, make sure to hit that like button and share this story. We love bringing you thrilling tales of romance, betrayal, and unexpected twists. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next dramatic underworld adventure. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Clara's shoes?